It was a beautiful day. Cold but beautiful, with the sun out and shining off the lake in front of us. Around me were the sounds of awkward, uncomfortable chatter. People trying to break the tension looked anywhere but at the tent in front of them. A low hum emanated from the center. I couldn't make out the words, but that didn't matter. I knew what the rabbi was saying. And then I heard a strike of metal on the ground and an awful, racking sob. Another scoop of dirt, another loud sob. And so it went as the funeral guests filed around the grave, a community forming a moving circle around the widow. As I watched all this unfold, my first instinct was to wonder why this was all happening in public. This kind of visible grief initially seemed to me something I personally would want to experience in private, alone with my memories. But I came to a realization after a few minutes in paying attention to the choreography of the moment. I saw the beauty in having the mourners constantly surrounded by a changing retinue of their most loved family and acquaintances. Each rotation brought a new face, full of comforting looks and a shared history. And by small increments, the grief was lessened. This is one part of Judaism that I find the most revealing. We are never left alone to confront our darkest moments. We join families in mourning during Shiva. We rise as one, as we will later this evening, to recite the Mourner's Kaddish, providing those needing Adonai's presence with our support. Judaism, in our rituals, has built in this concept of acting as a community. No one needs to be left alone to handle everything themselves, which brings me to this week's Parashat. This week we read the Parashat Yitro, in which we have, of course, the first of the two appearances of the Ten Commandments. It is undoubtedly the moment for which this Parsha is most widely remembered. But I want to focus somewhere else in the Parsha today. I want to talk about Yitro himself, Zipporah's father, Moses' father-in-law. By this point, the Israelites had been in the desert for some time. Yitro, a Midianite priest, had heard about how Adonai had saved the Israelites and gave up his previous religion to follow Adonai. When he reached the Israelites and came upon his son-in-law, he found that Moses was sitting as a judge all day, every day, adjudicating disputes between people and tribes. The effort was obviously and visibly beginning to wear on him, and this took up his time from morning until evening. To Yitro, this made no sense. He asked Moses, "Why do you act alone while all these people stand about you?" Moses explained how everyone relied on him, and Yitro correctly replied, "The task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." Let us sit with that for a moment. Moses, who knew Adonai face to face, who would shortly bring the Ten Commandments to the Israelites, the man who stood at the shores of the Red Sea and lifted his arms and with Adonai's help parted the waters, was not sufficient to solve everyone's problems. The man who stood in front of Pharaoh and demanded the Israelites to be set free had limitations. He needed help. And so, with Yitro's guidance, Moses set up a system of courts that would be familiar today. Courts for small, medium, large disputes, and at the top level, they would eventually come to Moses himself. He would no longer be responsible for dealing with all of the Israelites' problems alone. His community would be standing with him, lessening his load. And to me, this is Judaism in a nutshell. Ours is a religion that reveres routines. We honor our past with rites of passage, which overwhelmingly take place in the presence of our fellow Jewish men and women. We share our joy as well as our struggles, as well as our sorrow. So what can we learn from this parasha other than, not to murder or not to commit adultery, which is important? First of all, it's important to note that Moses did not come up with the system of courts because he looked inward and recognized his own exhaustion. He was running himself into the ground, but he continued because he assumed it was what the people expected of him. It took someone outside, his father-in-law, someone who knew him well and could recognize his clear absolute exhaustion to point this out. We don't always, as humans, recognize when we need help, when our strength is failing, even for the strongest among us. Judaism recognizes that it's hard to ask for help. So it has been built into our rituals so that we can take the asking out of the equation. Because we know that sooner or later, we will all be the person standing, utterly bereft, in front of an open grave, burying a loved one. And we too will need the love of our community. Shabbat shalom.